Hello art geeks! Welcome to another episode of A Curator's Reading List. This week's theme is the paradox of human condition in our age of unparalleled abundance and anxiety. Brace yourselves, philosophy is coming. Let's start with modernity. This is the name of a cultural stage that started in the late 19th century. Socially speaking, it accompanied the later stages of the Industrial Revolution and the rise of capitalism. It was defined by a belief in human nature and scientific progress, in leaving behind traditions and embracing a new way of life, and on a rational outlook on the world. At the same time, it also dealt with alienation, exploitation, and other negative consequences of the industrialized life. In the 1970s, a French philosopher named Jean-François Lyotard published a book describing the so-called Postmodern Condition, a highly contested but influential idea that describes a general feeling of incredulity towards the grand notions of human knowledge. This wasn't the first time that this term was used, and if you want the whole picture, you really have to read a lot about this. In a very simplified way, it describes a skepticism towards narratives that humanity used to take for granted, whether in art, religion, economics, history, or politics. The value systems of these and other areas of human knowledge were put into question and re-evaluated by several authors and artists. All of this to introduce this week's book, Hypermodern Times by Gilles Lipovetsky. Unlike postmoderns who negate the central tenets of modernity, Lipovetsky defends a kind of deepening of modernity's ideas, which are now looked at in a new context, through the lens of humanity's experiences in the past century. Hypermodernity defends a renewed commitment to reason, science, and technology, all of which contribute to humanity's rising standards of living. It rejects a doomsday view of the present, and instead it defends an empowerment of individuals and a belief in those individuals' contributions towards making the world a better place. At the same time, it maintains a certain level of uncertainty, as you will see, since now we know that science is a neutral tool, which can be used for good or for a horrible, horrible evil. Let me read you a bit of this book's foreword by Pierre-Henri Tavoyot. The hyper-contemporary individual is more autonomous, but also more fragile than ever, in proportion as the promises and demands that define him become ever vaster and more massive. Freedom, comfort, quality of life, and higher life expectations do not blunt the tragedy of existence. They merely make its scandal crueler. As you can see, not everything is rosy. Lipovetsky mentions the frenzied narcissism, mass consumption, and the rise of normalizing techniques used to control people's behaviors without them noticing, like for example surveillance or marketing. These mechanisms of control are different from the ones used by totalitarian societies in the last century. Nowadays they are more subtle, based on communication in media, instead of authoritarian strictures like the law. Like the book says, this is how the process of personalization works. It is a new way for society to organize itself and find its bearings, a new way of managing people's behavior, no longer by a tyrannical attention to detail, but by exercising the least constraint and encouraging the greatest degree of private choice, the least coercion, and the greatest degree of understanding possible. And this is merely a sample of the paradoxes that characterize hypermodernity. The more responsible behavior grows, the more irresponsibility increases in tandem. Hypermodern individuals are both better informed and more destructured, more adult and more unstable, less ideological and more enthralled to changing fashions, more open and more easy to influence, more critical and more superficial, more skeptical and less profound. Okay, so this might be my personal and therefore skewed view, but I think this book describes pretty accurately some facets of contemporary society. In the fight against terrorism and crime, millions of cameras and other electronic means of surveillance and citizen identification have already been installed in the streets, shopping centers, public transport, and businesses. Taking over from the old disciplinary and totalitarian society, the society of hyper-surveillance is on the march. The frenzied escalation of more, always more, has now infiltrated every sphere of collective life. A sense of insecurity has invaded all minds. Health has imposed itself as a mass obsession. Terrorism, catastrophes, and epidemics are regularly front-page news. Social struggles and critical discourses no longer carry any utopian perspectives that aim at overcoming domination. The only real question now is that of protection, security, and the defense of social benefits, of urgent humanitarian aid and safeguarding the planet. In short, damage limitation. One of the ideas that really resonated with me was that of employment, which is fundamentally different now because, at least in the more developed nations, young people have never been more educated and qualified. And yet, that has not resulted in a concurrent increase in work and employment standards. Now that employment is more precarious and unemployment persists, feelings of vulnerability, of professional and material insecurity are on the increase, together with the fear of the devaluation of one's qualifications, of being overqualified for one's job, and sliding down the social scale. The younger generation is afraid of not finding any place in the world of work. The older generation is afraid of losing its place for good. But while some people never have enough time, others, the unemployed or young people in jail, have too much time. On the one hand, we have the enterprising, hyperactive individual enjoying the speed and intensity of time. On the other hand, the individual with nothing better to do, crushed by the empty periods of his or her life. You might think that reading philosophy books is boring, but it really doesn't have to be. Philosophy is something that can have a real impact on everyday life. Besides, look at the size of this book. It's so small and easy to read, but packed with fuel for thought. I highly recommend it. That's it from me this week, and I will see you in 2 weeks with another book. Bye!